Alright, I'm going to call this meeting to order. So first up, we have roll call. Council at Large Cummins.
Here.
At Large Spear.
Here.
Council Ward number 1 Leaper. Ward number 2 Anderson. Here. Ward number 3 McNeil.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
I made a note to Amy that there was, on one of the votes from last meeting, that it was not unanimous, that there was an abstaining.
Alright. So with that change, is there an approval? A motion for approval? Spear with the first.
Second.
And Cummins with the second.
Leaper? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Yeah, I said that.
Okay. Alright. With the approval, we'll move on to the communications. This is the unscheduled portion. If anybody would like to address the council, make your way to the podium. Seeing there are none, we will close that portion of the meeting and move on to the consent agenda. And these can be enacted with one motion, and they are the city council minutes from July 1st, special council meeting minutes from July 10th, investment and treasurer's reports from June of 19, development director's report from June and July of 19, and the claims list. Are any of these need to be pulled out? Seeing there is none, is there a motion?
Someone?
Spear with the first.
Second.
And Cummins with the second.
Cummins?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Alright, so we'll move on to new business, which the first one is discussion and possible action concerning a change order for the James Kennedy Family Aquatic Center. Right?
Yeah, I'd like to call Joe Mueller from HBK to the podium. This major portion of this item involves a change order proposal to do caulking at the aquatic center. The amount of the change order would be $28,905. And there's, to a lesser extent, a deduct that you can consider too, that Joel can explain more. But I guess the main thing would be what's happening with getting a quote for caulking and its importance.
So the building has not been caulked since it was built, and the life of the caulk has already went through its useful life. And what's happening, and if you go up to the building and look around, you'll notice that the caulking itself is cracking and pulling away from not only the structural panels, but also the facade panels. So the structural panels are the inside of the building, and the facade ones are the stone, the more decorative ones. And so some of that, what's happened with the bad roof on top and then the caulking, it's led to, it's one thing worse than the other. It just goes to one or the other. And so the caulking needs to be completely cut out of the inside panels and the outside panels. So that building is 20-some feet tall, and there's caulking every 6 foot or 8 foot on the panels. And what we went into, if you notice when you go in the pool, it's probably pretty easy to see where the paint has actually came off the caulking. That's because the caulking has contracted or expanded. It's just went out of its way. And the inside the building, because all the moisture, it's affected that. But the outside is just ran its life. It's just out of its useful life. And now I was telling Brian earlier, last week and today, that the new caulking that they use will outlast everyone in this room. It's so much better product that they use now. It's made for the elements. It's improved since I've been in business. It's improved 100-fold easily. So you will not have to ever do this again in this whole council's or anyone in this room's lifetime. Probably 35 years, maybe 40 years. It'll last that much longer. So that's one thing I want to do. And the painter we talked about this a while back, the painter that's doing the work inside that's under contract with Sheets will not guarantee his paint job if we paint over the old caulk, because he knows it's gonna expand. So we're gonna have those colored stripes again. So, I asked Sheets Construction Company to get a quote from Mount Vernon Caulking. I've used Mount Vernon Caulking for over 40 years. It's owned by Rick Elliott, that used to be the mayor of Mount Vernon, so you can always trust a mayor. So, but Rick does a really good job. When I was at Cornell College, I used them religiously. They do a very, very good job. They stand behind the work. They'll have quite a guarantee on the caulking. I don't know what it is right now, off my head, but I came to Brian. I highly recommend it. It's going to protect the building. It's going to keep the moisture from getting in between the panels when it rains. And it's not the rain that bothers it. It's when the rain gets into those panels and it freezes, then that's when you get those damage on those outside facade panels. And so if we do the inside, the outside is more important than the inside, but we want to do the inside so it looks good when we get done with it. So in the quote, Brian was right on track. The material cost of the project is just at $26,000. Then Sheets has because it's under contract, they have their markup, and I have not talked to Sheets at all about waiving that. I'm gonna ask the question, because we could do it outside the contract and not pay their fee. So, that's one option for us to do also, is just have the city hire them, not through Sheets, and just get the work done. And they're taking a little bit of heat, they're a little behind schedule on the roof, so Greg's taking some heat right now, Sheets are, so I think I could probably talk him into doing something like that, so we could save some dollars that way. The other thing we came up last week is the metal cap that's on top of the wall is in really good shape. And so I went to Sheets and asked them what kind of credit we could get back on it. And I just got the number today, and I haven't able to talk anymore about it, but it's $3,750. So if we get that money back, it would help pay for some of it, not all the caulking, but it'll help pay for some of the caulking. So, but my recommendation is to get the work done. If we're spending this kind of money on the inside, I really think that caulking needs to be done. It's, like I said, you can go up there and I can literally pull it out with my Leatherman. It's just not sticking anymore. So, but I just thought of that when talking. We might just be able to go to Mount Vernon and talk to them directly, Brian. So that's one option. So I'm here to save money, but I also want to make sure we get a good product done. So, is there any questions I could answer?
Yeah, on the facade, there's also cracks that are not in the seams. What kind of, will those be caulked, or what kind of remedy?
So there are some, when we did the report quite a few years ago, there's actually a product that it's epoxy product that can be injected into that. That's something that Mount Vernon Caulking gets into also, especially when you're walking the front door, that panel that's right there on the front left, that first panel, that one's got some pretty good cracks in it. So we could have them look at it, but the reason they cracked is because water's got into those panels through the caulking of the roof, it's frozen, it's broken. That's the cause, but that can be repaired, because that facade outside is not structural, it's just pretty.
Yeah, I understand that. So you don't think that by doing nothing, it'll deteriorate more, and once we stop the water getting in, it'll just remain cracked as it is?
Yep. If we don't do any caulking now, the water's just gonna continue to get in, and it's gonna cause more damage to those panels.
Do we wanna look at having them do this and estimate it?
It wouldn't hurt. It'd be something.
I'm just thinking, trying to save $2,500.
Yeah, I understand that, but, those cracks are kind of,
Yeah, we could have Vance, I can call Vance tomorrow and see if he can come over and take a look at some of those cracks for you and come up with some dollars. It's pretty simple. It's a 2-part epoxy. It's super glue. It's similar to that. Just fixes the cracks and seals it up. Keep that water from getting through there. Yeah. I don't like to be the bearer. I'd rather come back and say I found $1 million underneath the pool.
What she would do.
Well, let's say we get the quote soon to do this additional work. If our first meeting in August isn't until 3 weeks, is that too late?
They actually would like to come in, pull the caulking out, let it breathe a little bit to make sure that they're not trapping moisture in the building, and they would actually like to caulk it after they paint. So this does not affect the timeline of the project at all.
Okay.
Speaking of the timeline, since you're here, you said they're a little bit behind.
Yep.
Is there
So
Any more
the
updates?
roof was supposed to take 4 weeks, and we're about 2 weeks into it right now, and we're about 2.5 weeks into it right now. They should be done, as of my talk with the contractor today, they're back on schedule. They'll be done in 2 weeks. They normally make a roof this size with 4 people, they went to 6 today, they'll have 2 more there tomorrow, we'll have 8 people on the roof starting tomorrow. And we'll have it tight in less than 2 weeks. The coping and things might be done, but at least the roof is tight. And we wanna get some work done inside. Adam's scheduled the guy to come in and spray and clean the pool and repaint that, and the guy wants to come and put his mural on, so we're jumping thinking we're gonna paint before the roof's done, but it doesn't hurt it won't hurt us in this end, so.
Alright. Well, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, you
Any
bet,
other
thank you.
questions? For Joel?
Yeah, Ryan's got literally's got my number, so. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate it, thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
You bet, thank you.
So does anybody have any other thoughts on this? Is there a motion one way or the other?
I would like to make the motion, but to also be able to receive the bids for the, what did you call it, super glue?
The epoxy? The
Yeah.
epoxy.
That.
Okay.
That's a good.
Alright, so Spear made the motion to approve this change order and also see the quotes for the 2-part epoxy on the outside. Anderson with the second.
Cummins,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Spear,
Yes.
Leeper,
Yes.
McNeil.
Yes.
Alright, number 2. Thanks again, Joel.
Thank you, I'll
Thank
just
you.
call them on. Thank you.
Number 2, which is discussion of possible action authorizing the use of GRIP/TIP funds for the Harding Theater project. Brian?
Yes, as I wrote in the synopsis for tonight, the Hardacre project was unsuccessful in its attempt to apply at 2 major state of Iowa grant programs. There really isn't a whole lot out there after those 2, and to wait to try again would put us a year from now, and still not know if our luck has changed. The Hardacre board met last week. They feel that the roof and the connecting masonry have to be addressed, can't wait another year. Plus, there may be some advantage as far as future fundraising if the public can see that there's activity going on there, and, an investment to preserve the place happening. So, in looking at the $200,000 that the council has said it would provide in upfront financing that would be recovered through TIF, they would like to have authority to pursue 2 quotes that we've received. One is from A1 Masonry, that's $67,540. The other one is West Branch Roofing, $51,149. So between those 2, it's $118,689. Now, because of things that might come up, I put in a 20% contingency. So if something did come up of significance, that the project wouldn't have to necessarily stop to get further approval. So I added 23,738, so it's just around, the total's just around 142,500, just shy of that. On that contingency, that would be used just if it has to be used, if there's, for example, some repair that we don't anticipate, don't know about, that has to be addressed while they're there. As I mentioned in the footnotes, the roof would have a 15-year warranty. There's the possibility that the mason's quote could be reduced by $8,500 if, and that's his figured cost to rent, for example, a scissors lift to get him up to the roof. If we can find a less costly alternative, then there would be an offset between his $8,500 and what our obtaining one would be. The project that we last applied for, this is the same scope of work with the upper masonry and roof. When it was a state grant application, the state required the use of an architect. And in that budget, that added $7,250. This project doesn't assume the use of an architect, so that's not in the budget that has been proposed. So the Hardacre Board last week met and would like to pursue the projects as described in the synopsis, but in order to go forward, they would need the council to concur.
Any thoughts or discussion? Pam, you're at the same meeting.
You know, it was, everybody pretty much agreed that doing nothing at this time is just stalling the whole process, and nothing's gonna improve on its own. And I think that if we want to proceed with some serious action for receiving funds, we need to show that this is gonna happen.
Yeah, I would agree that this remains stagnant too long.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if we wait too long, the roof will just fall in anyway.
It's not gonna get any better. It's not gonna heal itself. This just needs to be done. And the longer we wait, the worse it gets. Every time it rains on it, it makes it worse. So ASAP, get started.
All right, well then,
Suggestion.
I will ask for a motion then.
That is my motion.
Second.
Lever with the first and Spear with the second.
Anderson?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Leeper?
Yes.
McNeil? Cummins?
Yes.
All right, so that passed, and now we'll move on to number 3, which is discussion and possible action concerning broadband presentations. And up first, since you got here first, any commandeered the TV?
It's
Curtis
age
Dean.
before beauty. That's the way I like to put it.
First Dean, I'm gonna move around to the other side. He's got some slides up here. Or should we move around, or?
No, I've got a remote one here.
All right.
Let's assume it works for a
Turn
second.
around.
Okay, I guess I'll go the fashion way. Thank you, everybody, for giving me the chance to come and talk to you today. I'm Curtis Dean, and I am an independent consultant operating under the name Smart Source Consulting. And, yeah, we're dead. And I have been providing consulting services for the past 4 years as an independent. Prior to that, I worked for the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities. Okay, so we've got a laser, but we don't have a clicker, so I'll just stay here. So before that, as I mentioned, I was with the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, and I was the broadband services coordinator for IAMU for a few years. Prior to that, I was at Spencer Municipal Utilities, where I started working in 1998 when Spencer was launching a telecommunications utility. And that utility was built and has been so successful that over the years it's paid off all its debt, and in fact has been rebuilt now entirely to fiber to the home. So that was a good project that got me started in the world of telecommunications. And going way back, I grew up not too far from here in Wheatland, Iowa. So I'm just next door from you, next door from many moons ago. Class of '83, Wheatland High School, which doesn't exist anymore, as you probably know. So I'm here to talk to you tonight about some of the ways that a community like Tipton can investigate how to get better broadband for their businesses and residences. So what I'm going to be talking about today is a phased approach to trying to find a solution to better broadband in the community. And I've used this phased approach in several different instances in communities around Iowa. I'm in fact underway with what you see as phase one on this slide, a pre-feasibility study, actually doing one of those right now in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and one of those in Red Oak, Iowa. So you get a fairly sizable town and a town that's not a whole lot bigger than Tipton. And I'll go through what each of these phases is in just a minute. So phase one of what I'm proposing is to conduct a pre-feasibility study. Phase two is a business model, a business plan based on the information we gather in the pre-feasibility study. And then phase three would be an RFI process to identify companies that would be interested in either partnering with the city to bring better broadband to the community, or companies that would facilitate and enable the city to do that at less cost. And again, this is a process that we're doing right now in a couple of other towns. And oh, the clicker's working now, so I'll see if I can go back here and have it work. So the pre-feasibility study is what I'm really focusing on tonight, but I wanted to introduce the concept of the other two as well. So during our pre-feasibility study, there are several elements that we're going to address. One is education. If people in a community have not had excellent broadband service, if they have not had the type of 21st century networks that can provide very high reliability, very high speed, very high customer satisfaction, then they may not understand what this is all about. Because as you all know, if you've never experienced something, you don't know what you're missing. So we want to tell them a little bit about what they're missing. First of all, we want to let them know what the city has done to date and what goals the city, including the council and others, have in the future for broadband in the community. Now, you probably know, some of you probably know, and maybe some of you don't know, is that the city of Tipton, Iowa already has a municipal telecommunications utility. And the reason you do is in 1997 you held a referendum, and 84% of the people that voted on that referendum said, yes, we want a telecommunications utility. So you have a paper utility right now that has no assets, no liabilities, no employees, no trucks, and no facilities. But you've done the legal work that is required in the state of Iowa to take any next steps you want to. So your vote that you had in 1997 authorized the city, but did not obligate the city to build a network, and indeed you did not. And in doing that, you guys are very much in common with many other communities in Iowa that had a referendum but actually never built a network. There's about 40 other towns that have done that. We have about 25 and growing that have actually built a utility or are building a utility. So we want to talk to people in the community about what we mean by broadband excellence, because like I said, if they've never experienced it, they may think it's normal that their internet goes off an hour or two every week. And if you were to go to a Cedar Falls, Iowa, for example, and where they have a fiber utility, a fiber to the home network, they would never stand for that. Because, and they know how important it is because they're used to having that kind of extremely high reliability that those types of well-run, well-built networks have. We want to help people understand why this is important. Some of your citizens know why it's important because it is part of their daily lives. It is affecting how they live. It is affecting how they work. It is affecting how their businesses are operated. Others may not understand it. Maybe having fast, reliable internet is not as important to them, but they need to understand how important it is to the community as a whole and how important it will be for you guys as community leaders to keep the community growing, keep it strong, and keep it competitive with your neighbors. Also, as part of this education process is sharing some success stories for other areas that are served by fiber networks or municipal telecommunications utilities or networks that are just run by locally operated customers that bend over backward to provide customer excellence. And there are plenty of examples of those in the state of Iowa. Also part of the pre-feasibility study would be engagement. And this is basically having a conversation with people in town. This means not only with individuals, but this means with stakeholder groups, this means with the public. We would have several small group meetings where we would bring in leaders in these different areas and talk to them about what they're experiencing now, what they see as the problems they're having or the gaps that they're having, and help them brainstorm how those solutions might make their lives better, might make their businesses operate better. A few examples that I have listed of these small group stakeholder meetings are listed on this screen here, but you might have your own. In fact, for example, I'm doing the pre-feasibility study we're doing in Red Oak. We just had a meeting Friday, and we decided they really wanted to have a meeting with the ag community. Not only because the ag community is such a huge part of the economy in that area, but those folks are obviously very tied to technology. And so the local John Deere dealership said, yes, we'll host that, we'll be part of that, we want to facilitate this. So in Tipton, there might be other groups that you want to add to this list. So that's part of the engagement process. A very important part of this is measurement. First of all, we want to identify and measure and decide and measure what's here. You do have existing broadband providers in Tipton. Some people may not be always happy with those providers, but they're here. So we need to learn more about what they're doing, what they're offering, what speeds do they offer, and where do they offer them? What are their prices? Do you have to do something special to get a good price? What's their listed price? All of these factors. So we do a little market research and learn more about those existing providers and what they're doing. A big part of the measurement effort, though, is to conduct a comprehensive community survey where we measure not only what people have, who their internet provider is, who their telephone and cable TV provider is, but how people feel about those companies. Are they satisfied with the services they're getting? And if there aren't, why not? What's missing for them? Because that will help determine, is this a community where citizens, residences, businesses would be well served by having another provider present? And that will allow us later on, if we have that information, give Tipton some of the tools it takes to hopefully either recruit a company that wants to play a role in solving those gaps and capturing that market, or if the community decided to do it on its own, like 25 some other communities in Iowa have done. This is an optional piece that you can do during this pre-feasibility study, and that is to basically come up with a high-level cost estimate of what a fiber network would cost in Tipton. And the reason I say fiber network is that that's what that's what all municipals right now in Iowa that are exploring broadband are going to build. They're going to build a full fiber network. There are other options out there, and David's going to talk about one of those options in just a few minutes. But we would approach this about what would a fiber network cost in Tipton, Iowa. And we partner with HR Green, and HR Green can do a high-level design utilizing GIS information that will give us a cost estimate within 10 to 15% plus or minus. And the reason that's important is if you decide to move on and continue exploration, those numbers will need to go in and fit into a business model to decide, is this a good market for yourselves or for someone else? Kind of qualifying that Tipton would be a good place for somebody to do business. But this part is optional. You could do it here, or you could do it later on if you want to. So in the end, as a result of the pre-feasibility study, you'll have a detailed report that will provide all the data we gathered, not just a summary of the data, but an interpretation of what it means. And helping guide you, okay, what should you do next if you don't do anything next, which is another choice, right? And if you do want to do something next, what steps should you take? You would get that full survey data set, so we'll do some analysis of that for you. But you'd have access to all the raw data. If any of you are a statistician and you want to dive in and do some crosstabs, percentage of people who are left-handed that like to have high-speed internet or whatever you want to do. Okay, we don't ask about left-handedness, that's not something I do. They're also going to use an online tool called CrowdFiber, and this is to conduct a broadband assessment. And what CrowdFiber does is allows a consumer, residential or business person to go in, identify where they live, basically a pin on a map, and then they can say, here's what services I have, and then they can run an actual speed test where we can capture the data for any geographical location about what that consumer found in their personal experience. Internet providers in particular advertise speeds as part of their data services, but the advertised speed does not always match what the actual experience is by the consumer. And that creates a huge amount of frustration in the consumer. Not that it's not fast, but people feel like, well, I'm paying for 100 megabits per second, but I never get more than 20. And that really bothers people. So this allows us to capture some of that real world data. So you'd have access to all that information. And finally, if you decide to do that option with the cost estimate, then you would have access to that cost data as well. So that's the phase one. That's really what we're talking about here tonight. And if you guys had interest in this, then I would write a formal proposal to you with costs and everything. The reason we've done this as a phased approach is back in, I would say, not the old days, but not that far along ago, and it's still happening. The community was interested in solving a broadband problem, and one of the options might be to build a municipally owned network. Then they did what's called a feasibility study. And a feasibility study is this big monolithic project that could cost you $60,000 to $80,000 and includes a lot of different elements, right? It includes preliminary design, cost estimate, market research, survey, and a business plan. And what we found is after talking with a lot of consultants in the business that do those feasibility studies, they had a lot of communities that would spend that money, $80,000, and be very disappointed because what they really just wanted to know is there enough interest in this for us to even do anything? So they spent a lot of money just to find out yes or no on that. So what we decided to do is split it up into pieces so that at the end of each phase you've got an off-ramp. If you do phase one and the data is kind of wishy-washy about how interested our people are, you've got an off-ramp that you can stop your exploration right there. You can tell your citizens, well, we did this and we didn't find there was a lot of demand for it. If that pre-feasibility study gives you comfort that, wow, there's something here, we should do more, then you could move into phase two, which is the business model. That's where we take the high-level cost data and the cost estimate we talked about, and we basically build a business model based on that. So here's, if you spent this amount of money on this type of network, and you had take rates that were in this range, and we learned what those might be based on the survey, right? Here's what you could expect to see for a financial rate of return for a municipally owned system. And again, that would be within some pluses or minuses, but you'd be able to evaluate the range and evaluate, okay, is this something that would be, how does this feel to us? Does this pass the stomach test? Are we feel comfortable with this type of project? It would also look at what some possible financing mechanisms might be, bonds, loans, grants. Not a lot of grants out there right now, but those are the sorts of things by the time you get through this process, who knows what might happen as everybody keeps talking about infrastructure investment. We'll also talk about who are the potential for savings down the road with on a network like this as far as community operations, public works, transportation, public safety, all of those things. That you have an electric utility, you have a gas utility. Could those utilities realize some benefits in efficiencies and savings in better operations by having access to a network like this? So those we kind of wrap all into that business model. Again, the business model focusing on a municipal solution. The phase three, really what we do there is we say, okay, we've kind of framed up what a municipal telecommunication utility might look like. Let's set that aside for a minute. Now let's go out and let's identify providers that might be interested in just coming in and doing this, right? Maybe it's one of your existing providers. Maybe if they realize the potential, they might say, well, maybe we should invest in a fiber network in Tipton, or maybe we should upgrade our network so that it's more reliable, so that people are happier. Maybe it's another telecommunications carrier that is already nearby, that maybe just doesn't realize that this would be a good market. Or maybe it's a community, maybe it's a provider, and there are several of these that are out there right now that would just say, you know what, we're going to come in, we're going to build and operate the network. The city doesn't have to be involved, we just want you to help us make sure we get rights of way and cooperate with us however you can. So then what we do is through this partnership RFI, we gather that information through this RFI process, and then we review that information and bring that back to you, and then you can compare what those responses are to that municipal model you already set up. So in other words, those private providers that may have an interest are going to compete with the business model, and you can then decide which is the best route for you to go. And if the best route is, wow, company X has just said, we'll come in and do it, no involvement, no risk on the city's part, and they're a good provider and they'll do a great job and our customers and our citizens will be happy, then you might just decide, great, company X, let's start working together. You may decide that none of these guys are really filling your vision of what a better broadband network at Tipton would look like, in which case you might decide, well, maybe we should just do it ourselves like they did in Cedar Falls or Indianola, or going to do in Pella and Vinton and other towns. Or something in the middle, which might be, well, maybe we invest in the public infrastructure, but we don't want to be an ISP. We don't want to be the cable company. So maybe we'll build the public infrastructure just like we do now with streets, and then let somebody else run the trucks over our streets and pay us a use fee to do that. That's what we're doing in Adair right now, where they went through this process and identified a partner, a telephone company next door, and the city of Adair is going to build, finance, own a fiber network. We're going to have a lease with a nearby telephone company. That telephone company is going to pay a lease equal to the amount of the city's debt coverage, but they get to provide all the services to the end user, and it'll be a really good win for them. So that's the whole process, but again, going back to the very beginning, we're starting with this phase one, the pre-feasibility study, which is education, engagement, measurement, cost estimate if you want one, and then delivering that information to you. So this is could be a tentative timeline for phase one work, assuming you got started in July. Shift these back if decisions are still some time away. But really you're looking about 60 to 90 days from when we get to work to when we're through that phase one. And at that point, there's your off-ramp. You can decide, we're done, okay, goodbye. If you want to keep going, then you could work with us, me, and my partner Todd, or you can find somebody else to help you keep going. That would be totally up to you. But yeah, you'd be looking about 60 to 90 days. This should cover most instances, unless we have issues that develop along the way, or we can't get anybody together for a meeting, or whatever. So that's what the timeline looks like. So, any questions? Everyone wants to write our names down. Todd Kilkoff is independent consultant too, that we work together on a lot of these. Todd could be here tonight. Todd's former manager of the Indianola Municipal Utilities, so he was there when they first started building fiber network in Indianola. And when he left there, he decided to kind of do independent work like I do. So we partnered on that. So, questions?
When you've done this opening study, have you ever had any results show that it was not feasible to go forward?
Great question. Not yet. However, in the case of Adair, it really would not have been feasible for Adair to do it all on their own, because buying the network and building the network is one thing, but then bringing in and having the staff and expertise and everything it takes to actually be the provider, that was a bridge too far for a town the size of Adair. Now we're talking 800 people, right? So that would be a very difficult business case to make. It's like anything else, it's economies of scale. So the smaller the community, the harder it is to make it be fiscally reasonable and feasible. I'm working in Vinton right now. What's the population in Tipton?
3,000.
Okay, so you guys are on the low end of that scale, right? Where it's going to be, it could be a little dicey as to whether you could fiscally do this in a responsible manner, even with a 15-year debt timeline. But sometimes you don't know that until you go through the exercise, right? Plus, if you're identifying what the market potential is for a private company might say, well, maybe that's too much for them to bite off, but we can do this and not have to add any employees. We don't have to put in satellite gear and all this stuff, because we already got it in our town nearby. All we need to do is scale up and be able to serve that market. So, but there are, the smaller the community, the harder it would be to make the business case as a total do-it-yourself approach. We've been able to take the edge a little bit off that lately because the municipals are partnering on a lot of things. We have now 5 communities are co-owners of the video control center in Cedar Falls. So Cedar Falls, Waverly, Bellevue, Indianola, and Vinton now are co-owners of that. So they're spreading all those costs over that number of people. There are a number of the municipals that are partnering with, say, I'm On Communications out of Cedar Rapids, or Arion, or other providers to do some of the stuff to avoid the capital. So instead of buying all this equipment, you're basically renting somebody else's equipment, at least until you get up to speed and get running at full potential. So, yeah.
And if you use the Vinton example, what do they plan to offer to people? And do they have pricing set?
Pricing on Vinton will be set next Tuesday. People are anxiously awaiting because we've already started people signing up for service drops. And in Vinton, they have almost 1,200 people who sign up for a service drop, and they don't even know what the services cost yet. That's how excited they are about this. Vinton will be offering cable TV, telephone, and internet service, kind of what we call the triple play. They are also building their network, so it will be capable of smart grid. So they will be able to move to an AMI system for meter reading, electrical control of their electric utility anytime in the next few years when they decide to do that, which of course creates efficiencies, allows you to operate your plant more cleanly, allows you to do things that you can't do without those kind of automated intelligence in the network.
The opening study, would that require any assistance from city staff, or are you doing that within your company?
Mostly, we take care of that. It's going to be more of a, hey, Brian, who are the people I need to get to the industrial development meeting? Who are the people I should invite to the small business stakeholder meeting, that sort of thing. More of a, helping out with ground truth, whether that's you or someone on city staff, somebody to kind of help guide that. But as far as like, if we're gonna set up stakeholder meetings, we take care of that. There'll be a website portal that is launched. I've got a website called ourbroadbandfuture.com, and whenever we do a pre-feasibility study, we set up a separate page for that town's study where it uses the hub for all this information and take care of that. Facebook, social media, advertising, that's all included in the scope of services. Again, it's more of a, Tipton better than I do, tell me who I should be talking to, sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Mr. Dean?
Cool. Well, thanks for the opportunity, I appreciate it. David, you want to pick your
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
You bet, my pleasure. I had a display port, so I have a different cord. You HDMI? Where's this? That doesn't say that on your name tag over there.
No, it doesn't.
Just the title doesn't include on yours.
ion-powered melatonin to deliver up to 7 hours of sleep. Number 1 sleep doctor.
I might need that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great.
All right. We'll give the floor to David here.
All right, thank you for the invite.
Yes.
My name is David Lamarche. Thank you, Curtis, for the invite as he passed your name on, or my name on to you. Curtis and I bumped into each other in this line of work a little bit. And I've spent the past 16, 17 years in the state of Iowa. I grew up in the Chicago area. And my career has mainly been in telecommunications. I've spent roughly 16 years at a company called Calix. And they're the company that Cedar Falls Utilities uses for electronics, the electronics in the home that the fibers connect to and the electronics in the network. And so I've just cut my teeth on all of that, running engineering teams and such for Calix. And recently, spent some time, I had the city of Waterloo asked that I help them figure out a path forward for their situation, very similar to what you guys are in, frankly, where they have CenturyLink and they have MediaCom as their main providers, and there's some satisfaction issues there. And so I've been working with them and helping them understand what their options are for moving forward. A lot of what Curtis and I do, there's overlaps in different places, but really just different flavors of kind of different paths to similar goals. And so I wanted to spend some time just talking about some of the questions, first of all, and just the reasons for moving in this direction. So you guys had some questions in coming into this meeting, and one was, what can broadband do for Tipton that you don't have today? And so really the simple answer is it really depends. It depends on a lot of things. Today, the US government determines that 25 megabits per second speeds are that's the threshold for whether a community has broadband or doesn't have broadband. I live in Cedar Falls today, so that would seem very slow to me because gigabit services are available to everyone there. But 25 megs is the threshold. So if you have that here in this community, and this is part of what Curtis was talking to, is this needs to be determined. But if you have that, then bringing in a service provider that provides gigabit services may not have the same impact as a community that doesn't have those types of services today. And so it's helpful to understand that. Also, the fact is having a service provider that provides up to gigabit speed services is a draw. There's just something within the world of broadband that gigabit is sort of the bar, and soon it'll be 10 gigabit. If you look at Cedar Falls and Waterloo, those are communities I'm familiar with. They're really one metropolitan area. But if you look at the population of Cedar Falls and the population of Waterloo over a 20 to 30 year period, not to say that this is the only reason, but you see a continual trending up in Cedar Falls, and you see kind of really a little bit of a dampening in Waterloo, depending on the time period you look at. At the same time, you look at the investments that Cedar Falls has made, and so over those similar time periods, you see Cedar Falls growth in the 15 to 23% range over 20 to 30 years. In Waterloo, you see a positive 1% growth in some areas, negative growth in others. And so obviously there's a lot of factors to any community's growth or contraction, but Cedar Falls has invested and it's really paid off well if you look at those two communities. So it depends whether this is the thing for Tipton. Quality of life. So just, and again, Curtis touched on some of this, but why would you need broadband greater than 25 megabits per second? Maybe many of you don't use it that often. But the fact is, there's a trend, and I'm sure most of us have heard, just towards cord cutters. Personally, I haven't had cable TV for 10 plus years. I've just done everything over the internet. Today you can watch any channel that I looked for over the internet, but that requires bandwidth. If you have Netflix and you want their high definition service, they require at least a 25 megabit per second bandwidth level just for one stream over Netflix. So if you're a community that has 25 meg service, that's not going to work out real well if you're a home that likes high definition video content. Streaming. Just streaming a high definition video on YouTube takes 3 megabits per second. I have 4 kids. In my home, there's many video streams happening and simultaneously living at any given time. So you can see how those types of numbers add up to a need for broadband that has to do with just quality of life in the day we live in. Shopping, and surfing the internet, just going on to Amazon, and during Christmas time, maybe your kids are, clicking on a remote control vehicle they want, and they like to click the little video and watch the little video if you're driving around. This is just how people interact online, and they all require bandwidth. So quality of life is a big one. Business attraction and growth. The fact is, by having high-speed internet, you can attract business from other places too. A smaller community where costs are lower. You're close to Iowa City. You're close to Cedar Rapids. And so you can potentially attract those or partners that are providing, or suppliers that are providing to large companies in those communities. So you have that benefit, and if you're wanting to attract somewhat of a veteran community to those types of areas, having broadband is critical to that. Looking at Cedar Falls, again, it's just an area I'm very familiar with. They've seen a growth of 1,200 tech jobs to over 7,000 tech jobs over a 20-year period. So that's a community that's prioritized broadband and has prioritized investments in those areas. And then remote workers. That continues to be on the rise. There's recent articles that support that. And so there's many reasons why having high-speed broadband is beneficial to a community. In working with Waterloo, I reached out to Debbie Durham, and just asked her about her perspective. She's the Iowa Economic Development Authority Director, and now she's also the Iowa Finance Authority Director. And these are just some quotes that she shared regarding the Waterloo initiative. And she just noted that reliable and affordable internet connectivity is critical to the state's economic strength and the well-being of our communities. Also, access to high-speed internet encourages business expansion. And then on the right, where internet service has extended to rural areas, we're demonstrating that tech jobs traditionally centered in large cities and on the coast can be done in rural Iowa. When you think about it, we can run the world from anywhere in Iowa if we're connected. So this is within the past year, Debbie's comments just on broadband for Iowa. And she's doing a lot of great things for this state. So there's a couple questions about what is Tipton's potential for success in executing a project like this. And Curtis has really walked through that in depth. An adoption study is needed. I provided a proposal to you guys for a couple things. Didn't include an adoption study, but that's an important initial indicator. Curtis has done a great job explaining why that's important. But also discussing with the incumbents that you have here and understanding what they provide. That's a difficult process for if you're not technical and you don't have an understanding of the type of ways that broadband is delivered. But there are a lot of incumbents in this area. There are 4 to 6 not considering satellite providers. And so understanding what each of those companies offer within the city limits here, what those speeds look like, what their customer service issues are, etc., are important. And potentially there's a path there apart from building your own internet service provider. And so considering that's important. And then understanding that technology is making the business more attractive in general. So things are changing quickly. There's different ways to deliver broadband. Fiber has been the kind of the best way for a long time, but it's also very costly. And so if cost isn't an option, fiber is, I would say, the best way to go. But if that's not in the deck or in the cards as far as your community goes, there are other ways to make this happen. Other communities have built municipal utilities successfully, and Curtis touched on that, so I won't repeat that. And then as far as options for how to go forward for your community in solving this problem, there's just these different approaches. One is a third-party build. That's part of why you guys reached out to me, was talking to other companies. Can someone come in and build that? Curtis has covered that. The idea of building a municipal utility. And then there's the possibility of doing a public-private partnership. So that might be something like what Curtis talked about, where you build the infrastructure and somebody comes in and operates it. But it can look a lot of different ways. San Francisco's been going this route, and other large communities, it's caught on more recently. or you can do nothing and just wait and kind of see if the problem solves itself. That's an option, but often not a great outlook. If you think about high-speed internet, like the rail of 100 years ago, the communities that had rail coming through them are the communities that flourished, and the communities that didn't, they didn't flourish. You could think about the interstate system. The communities that were bypassed by the interstate system haven't flourished. You think of Highway 66. And so today, really that highway system or that rail system is I believe, high-speed broadband. And communities that have it are flourishing, and the communities that won't, in the long term, I believe will have challenges. Another one of the questions you guys had was Highway 38 is going to be redone and torn up through town. That's a long stretch, assuming you're hitting your city limits. It looked like about 1.7 miles. And the question was, should the city put in fiber conduit when that's being done, or fiber potentially? And while there's just not enough information to say yes or no to that question today, it is important to realize that for some approaches to broadband, just putting that conduit down that street would provide up to 20% plus of the fiber needed for a fixed wireless and hybrid build out. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's a lot of fiber, and if you guys were going to move in that direction, it potentially would be a great thing to do. But there's just really not enough information to answer that question clearly today. It should be noted, though, that putting in conduit is a key thing to do. So I'll just note Dubuque, for instance. Dubuque has, for the past 10 plus years, had a policy where when they opened up their roads or their right-of-ways, they just put conduit in. And every time they did it, they put more conduit in. They have a huge quantity of conduit in now today. It's allowed them to put over 1,000 cameras around the city they have, and so that's helped them reduce crime. It's allowing them, IMON Communications is now deploying residential services there and using that conduit. And so once the conduit's in place, it's very beneficial. Conduit is in the 30 to 50 cent per foot cost range, and when you already have that road opened up, laying it in there, oftentimes it doesn't cost anything. It depends on the negotiation you do with the road crew. So it's a pretty low cost for that kind of a distance, even if you didn't fully leverage it. But that's just a uninformed, off-the-cuff recommendation. All right, just a couple more slides, but I want to talk about delivery methods, and this is something that Curtis touched on. All the communities that you've worked with, Curtis, you mentioned, have done fiber to the prem. And basically that's just a fiber optic cable to every endpoint. Fiber all the way to the home, all the way to the business, and all the way back to the data center. And that piece of glass really seems to have no end of life. I mean, they do technically, usually in the 30-year range, but fiber that's been in the ground 30 years plus is still going today. And so you can upgrade the electronics on either end of that fiber really forever and continue to leverage that fiber. So the fiber put in 20 years ago is able to do 10 gigabits today because you put different electronics on the end of it. So that investment in fiber is powerful, but it's also very expensive. And if you just looked at rough projects of these types, oftentimes the numbers between $2,500 and up to $5,000 plus per home passed is a pretty good math number to use in looking at how much a project costs. So fiber's expensive, but if you have it, you can upgrade endlessly. Cedar Falls is getting ready to go to a 10 gigabit per second service offering, but they can do it with the fiber they have in the ground that they put in 10 plus years ago. However, something that's got me excited, just being in this industry a long time, is if you've got the money, go for fiber. But if you don't have the money, a lot of folks have just really haven't had a lot of options. There are technologies today that are really giving other options besides just doing fiber all the way. And so this concept of hybrid fiber / fixed wireless sounds complicated, but really instead of bringing fiber all the way to the endpoint, you bring fiber to a device that can then send the rest of the information over a wireless connection. So this is called fixed wireless. In a fixed wireless scenario, you have a device on your home, typically about this size, that is within, depending on the product, often within 1,000 feet, sometimes up to 4,000 feet, of another device on a pole. And these devices on the poles are, often you don't see them, they're cylindrical, they're about the width of a pole, and that's called an access point. And so by having an access point on a pole within a certain distance of an antenna on your home, you can, with today's technology, get up to gigabit speeds across a wireless connection like that. And so that it goes head to head with a lot of what companies that have fiber today are offering for their service packages. There's a big cost advantage in that there's a lot of variables, but you're looking at in the range of 30% of the cost of a fiber network. And so just looking at the pros and cons of these two approaches, fiber on the left there, it's the fastest. You're going to get the fastest data speeds, and it's a great way to go. It's the least maintenance. Everything in the field is non-powered, so you're not rolling trucks to deal with power issues in the field. It has long life. It's easy to upgrade the electronics, but it's expensive, and it can be a difficult business case for a community. But on the right, a hybrid fiber/fixed wireless approach is fast, so up to gigabit speeds. Right now, Cedar Falls, the residential speed tops out at gigabit speeds, and that is the case in a lot of communities. So that's going head to head with the best offerings today. It's a fraction of the cost of fiber to the premise. And a really exciting thing, this is something that Waterloo really liked, is it's expandable. So you're going to put fiber in the ground for this type of an approach, but you're just not going to go all the way to the home or all the way to the business. Instead, you go to a pole. If you, in a future, let's say you have funds for something down the road and you pick a certain neighborhood and you want to do fiber to the premise in that neighborhood in the future, you can simply attach out of the end of that fiber and continue to build out. And you can change part of your network to fiber to the premise in the future. And so you have a totally different business dynamic here in that you can put in a system that's, rough numbers, a third of the price, start to realize revenues, start to solve a problem, and then continue to expand that system as those revenues come in and invest more in the system and get to the fiber to the premises future if that's what you desire. So that's just an exciting set of technologies that are out there today. Sorry about this. I tried to set things that wouldn't happen constantly. And then it's flexible. So when you throw wireless into the picture, if you want to get wireless from this building to a couple blocks down, you can put up a wireless antenna in an afternoon on each end and have that connection up. And so rather than burying fiber, which takes a lot of time, you can get there wirelessly much more quickly. And so you can get a quick deployment. But there are some line of sight considerations for certain technologies, and so trees can be a factor, buildings can be a factor, and so planning is really important with how you deploy something like that. And then you do need vertical assets, so poles, these devices don't have to be way up high on towers, but on top of streetlight poles and those types of things are where these are often deployed. And this is just a little picture, if it's any help at all, to think about going from a tower or a pole to the home, and then once you get to the home, everything feels the same. The home is still wired the same. You still have your Ethernet jacks, your wireless modems. So this type of internet does not feel any different to an end user. All right, I've covered some of this, so I'll just briefly go through this, but there was a question about what a project like this might cost. And so, rough numbers, some fiber to the prem municipal ISPs can be built in the $2,500 to $5,000 per home range. That's typically building your data center and designing it and putting the fiber in the ground and the whole works. That can be higher or lower based on the number of homes and other issues. An important factor is whether you have fiber to this community, and that's not something I know the answer to. But if you have, you do need to get to a hub somewhere, and that requires what's called backhaul fiber or internet transit. And you either have it or you don't. Waterloo sits on tons of fiber pads like that. I don't know what that answer is for Tipton. So that's part of the study, would be determining, are there fiber paths here to get to Cedar Rapids or to get to other places, or do you need to go build 50 miles of fiber? That can really change the picture financially. And then a hybrid fiber fixed wireless approach can be in the $1,000 to $2,000 range per home, based on a lot of different variables. And then there was a question of what are the odds that we won't lose money annually, and I don't want to try to answer that here. There's just so many dependencies, but you can have a great business case and it can be managed poorly and lose money. So really doing the research up front is what's going to help to answer that question. And then the proposal overview, this is just very high level. I provided you with the longer readout. But mainly the approach that we take is to consult with existing providers. So what is the picture today? Who are the providers? What homes and businesses do they serve? What speeds they serve those homes with? What technologies, etc. And do any of those already solve the problem today? Maybe it's not known. Or can those companies potentially step things up and get you to a better place without a big investment from the city? So looking at the existing providers and assessing that landscape, that's one piece. And the other piece is determining what it would cost for the city if they decided to go ahead and build an internet service provider. What would those costs look like? What are the technology options, the costs of each, the payback on those approaches, etc. And so those are the kind of the two pieces: existing providers and what they offer today and what they're maybe willing to do, and then what it would cost and what the technology options are if the city wanted to do something. And then we could add an adoption study. That's something that Curtis does very well as well. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Any questions or comments on this?
Who again is doing the hybrid system?
So the hybrid systems are being used in a number of different places. I know IMON Communications is looking at that. They haven't deployed it yet. They've done some test runs. There's a company down south that is doing has 10,000 plus subscribers on hybrid technologies. There's companies in the Twin Cities that are doing this. I mean, there's companies and communities around the country that are doing these types of things. They're just starting to get into more urban areas as the technologies expand. What you probably heard a lot of is the Verizons of the world, the T-Mobiles of the world. They're doing what's called 5G, which is a high-speed wireless technology. That's the same thing. So the Verizon and other companies are investing in those technologies in large cities like San Diego and many other cities across the U.S.
Can the hybrid system offer the same services or programming?
So great question. So I want to differentiate what types of services you might want to do over fiber as opposed to over fixed wireless. So Curtis referred to the idea of doing, subscribing to the video head-end in Cedar Falls. So this concept of you having a set-top box and you have your remote control. Fiber is the better approach if you wanting to do what they call triple play. You have your video, your broadband, your telephone, etc. If you're going to do a fixed wireless approach, typically that's going to be just a broadband play where you're just providing high-speed internet services. Of course, over that you can get video services, and over that you can get phone services, but I wouldn't recommend an ISP build a video service with set-top boxes, etc., across that type of an infrastructure today. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any hybrid system with wireless? Are there any security issues?
There's not that have come to light to date. The fixed wireless is not Wi-Fi. So it's important to understand that it's not Wi-Fi. So somebody can't just drive down the street, pick up the signal off a fixed wireless connection, and potentially hack in. It's an encrypted signal that goes point to point between two places, and it's not a signal that a computer could just pick up and get into. So it is very secure, and it's also got a lot of other benefits. probably put you to sleep with all those, but. Anyway, does it answer your question?
And if the council went ahead with your proposal, would that involve city staff? Or would it be the same as Curtis's answer? Or would city staff be part of this?
It's similar to Curtis's answer in that I would need to know endpoints, so that often is water meters, those types of counts, and some information here and there, but no, this will not put a heavy burden on the city staff in any way.
And can you make, well, like was mentioned in Vinton, can you, I guess I'm asking mostly about the hybrid system because it's different than Curtis's, and it's kind of interesting to me, even though it may have some shortcomings, it has advantages too. Can you, off of the hybrid system, do AMI?
So you can have smart devices in the home that work across the internet. I do not have firsthand knowledge of the AMI technology and where there may be some shortcomings there. That's something I can look into. I don't know, Curtis, if you know.
Well, I think AMI is one of those things that a lot of utilities are planning to do it, but a lot of them aren't doing it yet because they haven't quite figured out why it makes sense for them. Blaine and I are going to catch up about this afterwards, about what's in it for the electric utility. May not be a lot in it for you today, but that getting that intelligence in the network so you can manage it better in the future may be very important depending on where we are in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. In a lot of cases, AMI, that final gathering of data is done wirelessly to a collector point, and the collector point sends that data back to your main office. That's what a lot of the AMI today is. What, say, for example, New Hampton is designing a fiber network right now. And one of the things that's been very important to them is they want to be able to gather that AMI meter data, not over any kind of, they don't want to use wireless at all, they want it 100% wired. And so they've been working with a meter manufacturer that essentially will have an Ethernet port in the water meter, an Ethernet port or adapter in the electric meter, and then they would just have to run Ethernet cable from that into the house's hub or router. So,
and so doing it
what the last mile is probably is not the important factor there. It's can you interface with whoever's running who's ever made those meters and operates them.
And just AMI is automated meter for everybody.
It's actually more than that.
Yeah, I know.
It's a lot more than that, Brian. One of the questions I have for him is like, our current system, the census is AMI. We've already spent the money for a collector. We get all the information as we so desire, which we don't have it hooked up yet. So, because of the cost, we haven't been doing any of the meters yet. But we spent all the money to buy the collector and all this other stuff. We just haven't implemented doing the metering. So what would be the benefit of the fiber system for the electric, gas, and water departments to have that?
So all of this typically, sorry, Brian.
No, I was gonna say, that probably falls in under what you guys' proposal would then be, wouldn't it?
Well, I think neither one of us are going to dive deep into what smart grid technology you're going to deploy. Right? It's probably going to be, in your case, because you've already done a lot of that groundwork, the real benefits are going to be beyond just metering and into things like what Chattanooga, Tennessee is doing, where they have self-healing electric networks. They have devices on the network that can detect an outage and automatically route power so that the power outage is limited to the smallest possible zone or area before and doing it quickly so the meters keep spinning where they can spin as opposed to somebody having to manually make that decision. Avoiding theft of service, which is probably not a big deal here anyway. But you would have to, I think, do a separate deep dive look at what are the smart grid elements that would be important to you today and in the future, and then decide which ones of those you need telecommunications for. I do know that in communities that don't do this, and they decide they want that, and then they have to work with another carrier in order to do that. Or they have to do what you did, right? Put up your own type of collecting system. So having access to it is, okay, you've accomplished a big part of that. We have a network we can use because it's city-owned, it's community-owned. Now, what are we gonna do with that? Is there anything we need to do?
See, and currently, the electric meters now will use the data from the water and the gas meters and collect it and send it to the collector.
Yep.
If there is an outage, if we so desire, it will tell us, ding, 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 ding.
Who's off?
Who's off.
Yep.
So, as far as being the self-healing part of it, we're not Chattanooga.
No,
And,
sure.
basically, everything here is basically gonna have to be done manually
Yeah.
to restore power. I mean, we're talking about, you know, you're talking about installing $20,000 to $40,000 switches in different places of town to be able to do that.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious.
Well, and I think, here's the deal. You're probably not gonna make the decision to do that. Nobody on this council or the utility board are gonna make that decision to do that. But if you have the infrastructure in place, then you're enabling future decision makers and future utility superintendents to make that decision
Right.
without having to reinvent that very important part of the
At the end of the
It
day,
doesn't commit you to having to do any of that. It
Yeah.
prepares for you for the day when you may decide it's important.
today's technology comes back generally to an RJ45 Ethernet connection or wireless connection. That, whether you have a fiber build out or a hybrid fixed wireless fiber build out, you still end up with an RJ45 connection in the home or in the business that this type of information can go across. So it's really irrelevant to what's happening at the endpoint. And so any smart meter is going to leverage the internet protocol to send information back to the source, and whether a system is fiber or a hybrid approach isn't going to impact the success of that. It's when you're getting into proprietary communication mechanisms where they have their own system that's not using internet protocol, et cetera, that's a totally different world. And
See,
this
that's
will solve
where we run into a lot of problems in the electric industry, is because there is no set protocol.
Right.
GE products probably will not communicate with the Siemens product. The Siemens product probably is going to connect with the Schweitzer product. So here I am, I've got SEL, I've got Schweitzer, and I've got all these other different brands that I work with. And so what am I doing for the next guy if we do integrate some of this?
Well,
Yeah.
that. That might be a
concern
separate
is-
study.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I can see where this could get real expensive really fast.
Yep.
But this would be this would be a agnostic approach.
Right,
where
either
you have-
way, it's a way to move data from that
Exactly.
endpoint back to a central location that you own and control, as opposed to asking the phone company for help, as opposed to installing your own system just for that. In other words, it's doing other things too, but it's there for your use.
All right.
Any other questions or comments?
Anything else for David? Nope.
All right, I appreciate your time.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming.
Sure thing. Sure thing.
All right. So then moving forward, I guess any possible action would be asking for a proposal from?
Yeah, we have one from David. Now, I don't know if you want to change it in any way based on tonight or tonight's questions. I guess I'd leave that open. And the other one would be for Curtis's opening study. If you wanted to
Ask
have
for-
both, and then you can evaluate it, or maybe you're not interested at this point. I guess that's the question.
Or maybe you want to leave us to leave the rooms.
Brian, you should find it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we already established I'd lose that fight. It became physical in nature. Beyond rock, paper, scissors, I might do it.
So then, yeah, if you guys want to get proposals, somebody can make a motion.
I'll make that motion.
McNeil with the first.
I guess before I go further, David has already submitted a proposal? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
he emailed one to us too, but
So what we're asking is for Curtis to move forward and.
Yeah,
provide one.
and if you want to revise yours based on anything you've
Yeah.
heard, I didn't want to have one proposal and then, you know, have like one in the packet and then not the other one.
Okay,
You know.
okay. Well, I agree with Tim. I think we can't know until we explore it.
All right, and a second by Spear?
Anderson,
Yes.
Spear,
Yeah.
Leeper,
Yes.
McNeil, Cummins.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, you guys.
I'll have that to you by the end of the week, right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, so moving on, number 4, discussion of possible action concerning HBK Engineering, amendment number 2 for the Family Aquatic Center, right?
Yeah, this is in the amount of $1,050. It has to do with meetings and coordination for architectural specifications, including paint selections and ductwork fabric. And secondly, had to do with mural design and drawing specification for the interior natatorium. You know, we could have run it through as one of the bills, but it really is an amendment to their contract, so we're showing it as amendment to.
All right, any questions for Brian? There is none, is there a motion? McNeil with the first,
Second.
and Spear with the second.
Spear,
Yes.
Leeper,
Yes.
McNeil, Cummins, Anderson,
All right, number 5, discussion of possible action concerning the approval of the street closure on East 5th Street for the Touch a Truck on August 3rd. Yep, yeah, it is coming up quick. It's a pretty popular event. It'll be during the Ridiculous Day, and Linda will have a bunch of trucks for kids to drive.
I am on the chamber, and we have a committee discussing this event, and it was just proposed this morning to potentially move that up from 10:30 to 1. The event was actually scheduled for 11 to 1, 10:30 I think is just in order to get the streets closed up, right? Changing the event from 9 to 11 due to heat, that was a thought process. So let me ask you this before we make a motion on this. Could that be changed? Because Linda was not in on that discussion yet, so we kind of need to talk to Linda to make sure that that's a possibility. So could we make a motion for either time slot? Can we open that up to either time slot?
Yeah.
That'd be okay? So I would say that would potentially could be 8:30 to 11 as opposed to 10:30 to 1.
8:30 to 11:30, so?
8:30 to 11.
Okay.
And that again is just for the closing of the street.
All right.
And then we'll know more tomorrow for sure.
So yeah, we would just have to get that word to the city departments.
Yes,
Yeah, move it up.
yes, and I would, I have a message into Linda to let her know that that was discussed, and we should have an answer tomorrow.
All right,
And then I
so
can let you know when they get to.
we've had a motion to make it either 8:30 to 11 or 10:30 to 1, depending on the heat. That street closed. McNeil with the first, and Leeper with the second.
McNeil,
Yes.
Cummins,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Spear,
Yes.
Leeper,
Yes.
All right, number 6, discussion and possible action concerning approval for Meteor to have outdoor seating twice a month on Thursdays.
We don't really have a write-up, or I don't have a write-up for that, but it sounds like when they've experimented with it, it's been successful.
And we had looked into this before, and Tim Long had found, I think he found Cedar Rapids' ordinance. And he brought it to the council many, many moons ago, and, no. It was just looked at and then kind of dropped at the time, because we didn't really have anybody coming forward to,
I believe it said this on supposed to be here.
yeah.
And then after this went out, she told me they decided on Wednesday
table this?
Better.
So it'd be, they're saying now twice a month on Wednesday.
Yeah, she said that later on, that somebody would probably be here to speak on that.
All right, so if you guys want to table it?
Pass an ordinance for that?
No, we brought the information and then there was no like input, interest from the community, so it was kind of dropped back then.
I mean,
Because we had one of the hiccups was we were trying to determine whether or not we could since it was a
I
state
thought
road.
we passed something with the tables and whatnot.
No, that was just for a one-time.
That was just
Is
that-
it last? Sorry.
That was the other issue we were trying to figure out if the state would allow us to crash zone or something on the state road.
We can open container long, they serve beer there.
Yep, and it would be roped off. I mean, that was
Yeah, that's
included in
what
the
they
ordinance.
did,
That's your
there was one evening, a few
Mhm.
weeks ago that they did that, and they did tape it off, and it was during the gazebo, the
Yeah.
music at the gazebo night. And it appeared that it went pretty well. I know, I went there just to help tear down tables, and we were asking people to move back inside, so there were definitely people still there and enjoying the evening. I'm wondering, is it possible to make a motion to say either or night, or do we need to know? I mean, can we just make a motion on whether we would allow tables, or do we need to know which night?
I think you could do 2 nights a month, either Wednesday or Thursday. You might want to add subject to any DOT requirements.
Yeah,
And you might want to limit it. You don't want to make it open-ended. You might want to just say until September 1st or
Right.
some other date. Or get it past Labor Day.
sure. Well, that's what I would make a motion, that we go ahead and approve 2 nights a month for a Wednesday or a Thursday, whichever they decide to go with.
And using the same regulations
Right, yep,
from when they had it.
right. And obviously roped off. Was there a time frame from like 5 PM to 8 PM? Was there anything dictated in there? And
I
if
don't think
not,
there
do we
was
want
one.
anything dictated in there? I think they probably close before it would matter anyway, to be honest. They probably close at, 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then I would say up through Labor Day.
You got all that, Amy?
That was a really long motion, guys, but that was my motion. I cannot.
So a motion has been made to allow them to have Thursdays or Wednesdays, twice a month, using the same regulations they had during their previous outdoor seating. And Legal with the second?
McNeil?
Yes.
Cummins?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Weaver?
Yes.
All right, so it's passed, the last new business for the evening, which is number 7, and it's a resolution accepting the Tipton Downtown Alley Underground Conversion Project as complete.
Yes, this does 2 things. It closes out the project and then it authorizes the release of the final 5% retainage, which comes to $2,489.55. As far as I've heard, it was a successful project.
Any questions for Brian or Floyd? Leaper with the first,
Second.
and Spear with the second.
Cummins?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
Weaver?
Yes.
McNeil?
Yes.
All right, so that closes that off. Now on the mayor's report. We did have an internet outage downtown. I want to thank Floyd and John and all the rest of his crew, and also the other utilities that showed up to help out and get that back going. I saw they're still working today, so it's been quite the project, and you guys' work has not gone unnoticed, so I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And the road crew showed up today, so they've been grinding and getting ready to lay down asphalt. So please be aware of that and be mindful of all of the extra construction equipment that might be rolling around town. And that's all I got. Council reports?
I'd like to make a note that next Thursday, the Hardacre is going to sponsor a Ford Drive-a-thon, whatever.
Drive for your community.
Drive for your community. And we need anyone we can get, one person per household, to sign up. I think Jerry said it took about 300 signups to get the full $6,000 that they offer, which we'd like to get. And at the same time, we will have a root beer float, little concession for root beer floats for sale. So everyone come.
When is this one, Pam, you're out?
Root
It
beer
is
out
the
next
20
Thursday.
Sam, when was it?
Next Thursday.
Next
Yes,
week.
next Thursday.
One of the things that he mentioned too is if you have